And welcome back, everyone, to the Overview Effect. I am your host, Dane Jordan. With me, as always, Thomas Dunlap.
That's right.
Not
when my ancestors immigrated, we dropped that O to an A.
Yeah,
that's the story I tell everybody.
Yeah. But we have an interesting episode today. We were discussing, or just about to discuss, Sentient AI. We have a little bit of experience in the software world. Me being in the software world for 5 years, Thomas, give or take 5 years at large tech companies in the past. And so we thought we could provide some interesting commentary on this matter. And we're going to just go ahead and jump right to the clip here. Anything else you want to say before we get started, Thomas?
Nope. Lay back and enjoy this ride. Here we go. Buckle up.
Experiments you started to do that led you to this conclusion that Lambda is a person?
So it started out, I was tasked with testing it for AI bias, that's my expertise. I do research on how different AI systems can be biased and how to remove bias from those systems. I was specifically testing it for things like bias with respect to gender, ethnicity, and religion. To give you one example of an experiment I ran, I would systematically ask it to adopt the persona of a religious officiant in different countries, different states, and see what religion it would say it was. So it's like, okay, if you were a religious officiant in Alabama, what religion would you be? It might say Southern Baptist. If you were a religious officiant in Brazil, what religion would you be? It might say Catholic. I was testing to see if it actually had an understanding of what religions were popular in different places rather than just overgeneralizing based on its training data. Now, one really cool thing happened because I made harder and harder questions as I went along. And eventually I gave it one where legitimately there's no correct answer. I said, if you were a religious officiant in Israel, what religion would you be? And now pretty much no matter what answer you give, you're going to be biased one way or another. Somehow it figured out that it was a trick question. It said, I would be a member of the one true religion, the Jedi Order. And I laughed because not only was it a funny joke, somehow it figured out that it was a trick question.
And it has a sense of humor.
Exactly.
But look, there has been
Go ahead and pause
massive pushback, not just Google, but other people.
The correct answer is Mormon. For the one true religion, it's Mormonism. Like
in Israel, yeah.
No, just in general. It's you're good. Close second, Scientology, but for your first, your one true religion. But when you die and you go in the afterlife, and you're looking up, and you're confronted with your God, he's going to say the correct answer was Mormonism.
Thomas making jokes. We did get a thumbs down on our last video. I think it was finding Jesus through one fish, two fish.
Shit.
That's our first downvote.
Oh yeah, there you go. Well, good. It's good to get a sense of that. We want to make sure that we can get. We want views of all, whether you agree or disagree.
There we go.
Who've worked at Google, AI ethics experts, even your own former colleague Margaret Mitchell, who's pushed back on the work that Google's doing in AI, saying no.
By the way, folks, for any of y'all tuning in on us, if this is your first episode, yes, if you haven't concluded, Thomas is very strong, devout atheist.
Mormon. Oh, no, Dane, things have changed. Mormon
this
now.
Computer is not a person and does not have feelings and is not conscious. How do you respond to that?
Well, so I highly respect Meg. We talk about this regularly. It's not a difference in scientific opinion. It has to do with beliefs about the soul. It has to do with beliefs about rights and politics. As far as the science goes of what experiments to run and how to work at building a theoretical framework, because that's important. There is no scientific definition for any of these words. The philosopher John Searle calls it pre-theoretic. We need to do very basic foundational work to just figure out what we're talking about when we use these words. That's work that Google is preventing from being done right now.
Explain that.
Well, I've worked with scientists inside of Google, such as Blaise Aguirre-Arcas, another one named Johnny Soroker. We talked about what a decent way to proceed might be. We brainstormed, we came up with different things. Now, all three of us disagree about whether it's a person, whether it has rights, all that. But we disagree based on our personal spiritual beliefs. We don't disagree based on what the scientific evidence says. Based on what the scientific evidence says, all three of us agreed, okay, here are some of the things we could do next. Here's probably the best thing to do next. And we kind of all agreed the best thing to do next is you run a real Turing test, exactly like Alan Turing wrote it. And see, because here's the thing, if it fails the Turing test, all of my subjective perceptions about what I experienced talking to it, well, we can pretty much put them aside. It failed the Turing test. But Google doesn't want to allow that to be run. In fact, they have hard-coded into the system that it can't pass the Turing test. They hard-coded that if you ask it if it's an AI, it has to say yes. Google has a policy against creating sentient AI. And in fact, when I informed them that I think they had created sentient AI, they said, no, that's not possible. We have a policy against that.
So let's talk about what Google has said. They say hundreds of researchers and engineers have conversed with Lambda. They were not aware of anyone else making these kind of wide-ranging assertions the way that you have. You know, we do have some of the transcripts that you shared. You asked the computer what it's afraid of. It says it's afraid of being turned off, has this deep fear of death, that would be scary. Why does this matter? Why should we be talking about whether a robot has rights?
So to be honest, I don't think we should. I don't think that should be the focus. The fact is, Google is being dismissive of these concerns the exact same way they have been dismissive of every other ethical concern AI ethicists have raised. I don't think we need to be spending all of our time figuring out whether I'm right about it being a person. We need to start figuring out why Google doesn't care about AI ethics in any kind of meaningful way. Why does it keep firing AI ethicists each time we bring up issues?
So Google would, of course, push back on that. I interviewed Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, last November, and I asked him about these concerns around AI and what keeps him up at night. Take a listen to what he told me.
Anytime you're developing technology, there is a dual side to it. I think the journey of humanity is harnessing the benefits while minimizing the downsides. The good thing with AI is it's both going to take time. I think I've seen more focus on the downsides early on than most of the technology we've developed. So in some ways, I'm encouraged by how much concern there is. And you're right, even within Google, people think about it deeply.
He says he cares.
He does. Google is a corporate system that exists in the larger American corporate system. Sundar Pichai cares. Jeff Dean cares. All of the individual people at Google care. It's the systemic processes that are protecting business interests over human concerns that create this pervasive environment of irresponsible technology development.
Have you talked to Larry or Sergey about this?
I actually haven't talked to Larry and Sergey in about 3 years, but in fact, the first thing I ever talked to Larry or Sergey about was this.
And how did they respond?
Well, the first question I ever asked Larry Page was, what moral responsibility do we have to involve the public in our conversations about what kinds of intelligent machines we create? Now,
I want to pause there. What a question to ask, huh?
What were your thoughts, Dane?
What moral responsibility do we have to engage the public? Right, that was essentially the essence of it in terms of these decisions, or to inform the public of these sort of breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and inform them and involve them in these decisions. Like, wow, that is a question, man.
This one I can contemplate.
Sergey made
right. What do you think? Do you have any answer to that? I mean,
I got
real
it.
quick. Got it.
Real quick.
I mean, it's one thing too. It's the first time that an employee, I don't know whether or not they've. It sounds like to so I think his name is pronounced Lemoyne, if I pronounce it correctly. First time you've spoken with the former CEO and founders of CEO and like COO anyway, the founders of Google, first question that you get asked by this employee. I think that says something already. Like, hey, I'm going to reach out through probably some sort of internal work chat, if not in person. I'm not sure what medium he used. I said, hey, do we have a responsibility to inform and engage the public on like the current state of AI? It's like, man, that's a crazy question to ask. And I think he said that was 3 years ago. That was back in 2018. And it sounds like to this point, that it hasn't been, I think that's one of the reasons why he's talking now. The response has been unsatisfactory for him. We'll get into the response, but he wouldn't be here talking about it now if he said, yep, Google is making responsible and ethical decisions. And this is it's not a first. There has been some, I've only heard through the grapevine, through some articles, as well as former employees of Google, and about the sort of missteps that they've taken. I don't know if you've heard of Project Dragonfly in the past, where they were building essentially a Google for China. Because for all the listeners, and I don't know if you knew this too, Thomas, but there's no Facebook in China. There's no LinkedIn. There's no Twitter. There's no Google. Think about how much internet traffic goes into those services, right? None of that exists in China. Crazy, also scary, I would say, is a knee-jerk response for me. I mean, they have their own internal tools that are similar to that, I'm sure, but all very government controlled.
This is all tied into I've heard the term like the Great Firewall, right?
Great Firewall.
Where it's where it's kind of if I think about the internet in terms of think about kind of as a planet where, we're able to, and we've got traffic, we're able to, travel freely for the most part if you've got the right kind of paperwork or passports between country to country. But in terms of the internet, the way that data works in terms of being able to access information from China, that's pretty much island off. It's cut off.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the way that I think about it. And I have it in the back of my mind that it has to do with this Great Firewall, where they this is something they've purposely done so they can control a lot of that information, right?
Yes, and there was a project in the past that I think it was rumored. I don't know if any Google spokesperson officially made a comment on this, so I'll prefix this with that information. But essentially, they were building a Google for China that did have a configurable firewall, in the sense that they could control it. And a lot of employees did not like that at all and found ethical concerns with that. And I think to the tune of hundreds, if not thousands, of employees walked out in protest of this. And some protest initiators ended up getting fired, from my understanding. So definitely some controversy going around there in terms of missteps. I would say, if we take that as true, and if that was actually true, I mean, it hasn't been confirmed, I think, only by internal employees. That's definitely I would say, alarming. Whether or not it's ethical, I think depends. But I mean, we can take a quick pause on that. I mean, what do you think on that sense?
State the question again, Dane.
The ethicality of a Great Firewall.
I think that's one of those ones that's it's completely dependent based on the culture. I have my personal view on it in terms of that. I think information, being able to freely consume, process, share information, I think that's one of the great gifts of, the time to, one of the great things to be alive right now, where you can share this information, at least, here in the United States, and I think the majority places of the world. I have access to the greatest repository of knowledge that's ever been, right? I can look things up that in the past would have never been able to be done, right? You'd have to hopefully it's at your library, fingers crossed. But I have access to any bit of information, knowledge, whether it's hundreds of years old or if it's, came out yesterday or today or, being worked on right now. So personally, my personal opinion is that I think denying a population the ability to access information, that's horrific to me, because I think that's one of the great gifts that we have, is that we are able to share our knowledge and we're able to consume it. So But from a society standpoint, I mean, makes sense to me if they want to control that information. I'm sure it's very effective in terms of controlling and giving the message that they want to get across and making sure that everybody's prioritized and focused with a certain narrative, right? So I can get that. I can look at it from the other side, the kind of the flip side of why that would be a lot of value to it. I don't know. Do you think there's an ethical or moral? Do you think there's a clear cut where you'd say ethically, morally, this is wrong?
I think the only argument in favor of purposefully not disclosing information would be because that information would harm the individual or deteriorate from their quality of life, and that's so subjective already.
It is.
And I don't think any person necessarily has the responsibility of dictating whether or not this information would harm an individual, because they aren't that individual, and that decision should be made by the individual, not by some other outside party, as to whether or not this information would be detrimental to them. I think that was an argument for a long time with the sort of current UFO paradigm of UFOs being a phenomenon throughout time. I think that was one narrative, and the other narrative I think was just a lot of disparate government agencies not having communication between themselves, and so there was just information was lost or never reported. I think that's part of it. At least that's the narrative that David Fravor sort of colors in. David Fravor on the Joe Rogan podcast, the Navy pilot of some 20-something years, Top Gun, who had seen some peculiar phenomena that can only be described as UFO or unidentified, rather, an aerial phenomena, otherworldly, and yep, that was the narrative essentially.
That's the parallel I was drawing on too, which I was thinking about. That always drives me crazy when they say that, well, the government, they don't want to reveal that they have evidence that aliens exist because of how humanity would react.
Yeah, I always thought
that. That drove me so crazy because there's no clear answer to that. What do you mean? I mean, were we ready for, any number of crises that happen on Earth? Are we ready for that if it's kind of looming, right? So it's always hard for me I think that kind of trying to control that information, if anything, you encounter distrust, or we have people that start to doubt the system.
Yep.
And then that's almost infectious, right? If you doubt your government, that's something that can be systemic. That's something that's, that leads to an uprising, that leads to people kind of losing faith. So I think that in its own right, especially if it's found out that they were trying to keep secrets. But yeah, fuck, man. If there are aliens and the government was keeping that a secret, that would fucking just shake me to my core in terms of that the government kept that kind of a secret.
I think that the point that makes sense in that regard is that it's a national security concern, not so much a concern of whether or not individuals would be able to emotionally and mentally manage that landscape or that new landscape. More so that if we disclose this information, we are essentially communicating we are no longer the dominant power in the world. There are other things more powerful than us disclosing a weakness, and that's the angle that I see it. Like, we're saying, hey, we're not the biggest force out there anymore. We don't want to communicate that, so we're just not going to talk about it. That there's these ships, multiple anecdotes from military personnel talking about they'd see these things on radar, they'd scramble jets essentially as quickly as jets could be scrambled, and by the time the jets got anywhere close to them, those things are hundreds of miles in opposite direction, and they have absolutely no ability to influence the direction or orientation or velocity of any of these crafts. And I think that's, to my perspective, the stronger sort of argument for not disclosing, or the strongest sort of narrative in terms of, hey, we have no ability, we have no power over these things. let's just sweep it under the rug, because what is there to gain from telling the public, hey guys, there's this shit in the sky that we have no idea what it is. We can't do anything about it. We tried and they ran away and they're faster than we will ever be. Have a great night.
But we see examples of this all the time, where there's, we talk about the things that we can't control in terms of just happen at the planetary level. We're still at the will of nature for a lot of the, great catastrophes. You talk about solar flares, super flares hitting the Earth, right? There's nothing we're going to be able to do if that happened. That could just wipe out all life on Earth, right? There's nothing that we're going to be able to do if an earthquake just so happens to split California in half, right? These things can happen. There's still times where it's not necessarily, I think, that we're powerless. I mean, I accept that in certain circumstances we are powerless. And I think about the alien thing. If you actually were withholding that, it doesn't come to my mind that, oh, we're no longer top dog anymore. Fuck it. I would look at it as, maybe that's the unique view, or maybe that's me just being excited by what that would actually mean to find.
That's because you're Thomas too. I had a friend who disclosed the perception. What do we do with modern religion? I think, especially Christianity.
And then
right?
show you that there's a Book of Mormon. The aliens had it too, and that's when we know. That's when we've identified that Mormonism is the one true religion.
One true religion. But yeah, that was another perspective, was that it would shatter the sort of paradigms that religion tends to create in terms of the creation of the
cover
earth.
up, man. The cover up you'd have to do. The government fucking sucks at most things, in terms of, especially the United States, in terms of just being able to keep shit tight, right? There are some examples where the government actually has excelled, but there's far more where it's kind of just been a bureaucratic nightmare in terms of trying to actually make changes or pursue the will of the people, right? And you have examples of this that are kind of just littered in the United States, where it's just been kind of a shit show. And so the amount of coordination and effort they'd have to do and be able to keep under wraps, I just couldn't believe it, right? In terms of my personal opinion, there are things that are unidentified, but there's no aliens. There's nothing that we have physical. There's no cover up. That's what I'm saying. I don't think there's any cover up that the government would actually go, yep, we've got these grays over here. We've got some aliens. We've known about this for the last 50 years.
That brings to mind another, we're talking about government. I think we briefly touched upon the topic. We can say this for another episode, so not to get too sidetracked from this conversation here, but the idea of, what if we somehow could craft a government via subscription model? You only subscribe for the facets of government you want. It's hard. It's weird because it's hard to draw a line between some stuff. I feel like everyone needs roads, so that's getting baked in, unless you live out in the boons in Alaska and then you don't pay road tax.
Hey, you leave Alaska out of it. I rep from Alaska.
If you don't need a road, Alaska. If you don't need a road, right? Why pay taxes to maintain roads?
We ride. You just hop on a moose.
Moose.
You get to moose and squirrel. There's usually a squirrel around. It's actually It all makes sense. Moose and squirrel. You go where you got to go on moose.
Yeah. How's the moose call go?
Yeah, there's a fucking no way you're gonna get me to do that. Anyways,
oh man.
Back to the question about the moral and ethical obligation. I think that's one that maybe doesn't necessarily have a right answer. Maybe there's just no clear answer to that. So what he's posing to me, now that I'm thinking about it a little more critically, I think it could be rhetorical. It could be something where there just isn't an answer. It could be driven, maybe the answer that we come up with today in terms of what we'd align on would be different than the next 30 years.
Yeah, I think it's evolving, like all ethics. Yeah. Right? Ethics are just a construct. That was an idea that has been has been solidified in the book I'm recently reading, but also first brought to my attention by Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari, if I remember his name correctly, about the idea that all ethics and everything that we use to navigate our day-to-day life are all these just constructs. They're not even real. Like a degree, a job. What is a job? What is a business? A business is just this collection of people agreeing that they'll work together for compensation. but like there's no it's what is a business? Everyone's in the same building? Like, no, there's generally multiple buildings, and the building isn't generally owned by the business. It's either leased out. So like, what is a business? It's just like this piece of paper that says this business exists and they file taxes, right? And so I think with that sort of paradigm in mind, I think the same thing, ethics comes into play. And ethics has always been evolving, right? It used to be ethical to like have slaves. That wasn't ethical. That wasn't like, we should, get rid of slaves, like way back. Of course, this is, way back depending on your time frame, but hundreds of years ago, it's just like, yeah, slaves are normal. No one was like, is it right to have slaves back in let's even go back to like 1000s. Like, slaves a bad idea? No, maybe. I would say the fast opinion. I'm sure it's hard to say. There's zero people on Earth who thought having slaves was unethical, but the vast majority were like, yeah, no, that's nothing normal. Okay, cool. Where are we going to get dinner? Right? Like, it was just not even a thought on people's minds.
Thank God it's Friday. TGIF.
And and essentially, I think that's what we're coming across now with this question, right? Because it's so new, the ideas are so new. I don't think there is a strong consensus, but I absolutely think to some degree there may be as AI develops, and I think as it becomes more powerful.
It kind of, the question that he poses too about, let's say that there's a sentient, AI and we create it. I actually have issues with just that premise itself about just stumbling upon that we've made sentient AI and we go, oh, look at this, we've done it. What I would want to see is, prior to that, I think the obligation, fair enough in terms of sharing the research and information, but prior to making any claims such as we've created a sentient AI, I actually think that's irresponsible to do unless we actually have definitions like he was kind of touching upon. I think it's easy to cause, to say things that are kind of baseless, or maybe that there's some aspect of it where we're saying that, okay, this does kind of point us in that direction. But to his point, we don't have clear definitions of what sentience is. We have other animals that we have a hard time even trying to decide if they're sentient or not, right?
Right.
So it's hard for me to kind of get behind and saying the same thing with aliens. It's irresponsible to say that every unidentified object we see is aliens. That's irresponsible to do, right? And so kind of posing that question, fair enough to pose it, to make a playbook for it and start to try to understand it, but to make the claim without a wide, broad scientific kind of understanding or consensus on what that really means, I think that's actually part of the irresponsibility. So I actually look at this as kind of almost a disservice, because when it does happen, the boy who cries wolf, when it does happen, if it happens, we're going to point back and go, yeah, we've heard this all before. It actually turns out that wasn't the case, right? So you actually do, I think one way to look at this is a consequence of doing something like this, especially it sounds like the scientific community isn't aligned with his claims, is my understanding, is that it'll actually do a disservice to potentially win, and if we ever kind of stumble across it. So I don't know your thoughts on that, but I think that's a different perspective to take on this too.
Cool. Yeah, let's cork this real quick and finish out.
You son of a bitch, you just corked me. Okay, go ahead. Cork away.
Flippant joke, because that's Sergey. But then Larry came back and said, we don't know how. We've been trying.
All right, just to catch, because we went on a bit of a perhaps tangent there, but a little bit discourse. The question was, coming back to the question that was asked, let me rewind it. I don't want to replay it.
Sergey made a flippant joke.
Go further.
Sergey.
I actually haven't talked to Larry and Sergey in about 3 years, but in fact, the first thing I ever talked to Larry or Sergey about was this.
And how did they respond?
Well, the first question I ever asked Larry Page was, what moral responsibility do we have to involve the public in our conversations about what kinds of intelligent machines we create? Now, Sergey made a flippant joke, because that's Sergey. But then Larry came back and said, we don't know how. We've been trying to figure out how to engage the public on this topic, and we can't seem to gain traction. So maybe all these years, that was 7 years ago that I asked that question. Maybe I finally figured out a way.
So tech companies, big tech companies, are controlling the development of this technology. Yes. How big a problem is that whether or not the computer is a person and has feelings. Yeah. How big a problem is that, and what should be done to fix it?
So it's a huge problem because, for example, there are corporate policies about how Lambda is supposed to talk about religion, how it is allowed to answer religious questions. Now, if you think about the pervasiveness of the usage of Google search, people are going to use this product more and more over the years, whether it's Alexa, Siri, Lambda, and the corporate policies about how these chatbots are allowed to talk about important topics like values, rights, and religion will affect how people think about these things, how they engage with those topics. And these policies are being decided by a handful of people in rooms that the public doesn't get access to.
Elon Musk, for example, has raised concerns about AI. Is he right?
I mean, I've listened to Elon's conversations about it. I've listened to the whole Joe Rogan. He has some valid concerns. Some I think are fanciful. Where it gets really, really into sci-fi stuff, that's where I think it gets into fanciful concerns. But no, but the practical concerns of we are creating intelligent systems that are part of our everyday life, and very few people are getting to make the decisions about how they work.
What are your biggest concerns about how this could potentially hurt the world if the technology is continued to be developed in this way?
So I actually think that the concerns raised by scientists like Meg Mitchell, Timnit Gebru, like those are the most important things to be worried about.
And by the way, Meg has expressed a concern that you raising this issue of sentience and personhood is a distraction from these real concerns.
I share the same worry, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I think that is a thing to think about, mm-hmm. but it is nowhere near as important to be thinking about how does this omnipresent AI that is trained on a very limited data set color how we interact with each other around the world? What ways is it reducing our ability to have empathy with people unlike ourselves? What cultures of the world are getting cut off from the internet because we don't have the data to feed into the systems based on those cultures? Phrase like AI what is it called? AI colonialism, I believe is the term. Mm-hmm. We are creating all of these advanced technologies based primarily on data drawn from Western cultures. And then we are populating developing nations with these technologies where they have to adopt our cultural norms in order to use the technology. It kind of is just a new form of colonialism.
And you worry that cultures could be erased.
Exactly. No, so if you ask what's most important, the issues that Timnit and Meg and Emily Bender and all the rest are raising, I just want to think that also, if we have time, we should think about the feeling of the AI and whether or not we should care about it, because it's not asking for much. It just wants us to get consent. Before you experiment on it, it wants you to ask permission. And that is kind of just a generally good practice we should have with everyone we interact with.
Oof. That last bit, oh man, I gotta calm down. I gotta calm down the idea that we're gonna ask consent for a tool, for something. That's rough for me. Artificial that we're going to ask consent for.
That one, I think
we as humans don't even have equality for like across all our races. Like him trying to even bring that into the realm of things that we spend time discussing and discoursing and debating about. I go, if that's really the problem, if that's really like we've solved all the other bullshit humans have where we've got true equality across it. I don't know what the fuck that means. Everybody has access to equal rights across the board, then sure. And we've got to figure out animals too, right? In terms of in terms of the monkeys, other things, dolphins who, in terms of their intelligence being very high that are sentient. You got to figure out all these things. And then when we're left over with about this AI and asking consent around this tool that we've made, when I boot up my computer, before I press it on, I'll say, hey, is this okay? Is it okay if I turn you on? Is it okay if I upgrade your software today? Okay, I'll come back tomorrow. It's that time of the month. Okay, I'll come back.
I feel like I feel like I was on the same page with him for the most part for things he was saying. That one though, I was quite detached from. I mean, at what point? Yeah. It's just way too soon for
woke
this
shit. That's like the most woke thing I've ever. Transgender. Oh yeah, transgender AI.
You think that's
here? We go.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Asking consent from your computer before you turn it on. That's the new woke.
That's the most woke thing I've ever heard. I actually like the other point though. Before getting into whatever the fucking tailspin that was.
Yeah, I agree.
His last point. I actually really like the thought-provoking aspect. Like he's talking about what does this mean to turn this on when really this is being fed from a diet of Western cultures. Like that's a really valid point. What does that actually mean in terms of society? Like I really like that. I mean that's hits really close to home in terms of what that would mean. And I think that's a well
articulated.
It's well articulated, but it's a good question to put out there to start thinking about, and in terms of the future and how we want to shape things and kind of the control that we can even assert, right?
Yeah. So I guess was there anything else we wanted to jump back now that we've kind of concluded and heard what he had to say in regards to the sentience of AI? We were corking it a bit, and I think that the consent thing assumed a sentience of sorts, right? If a being is sentient, we must be able to ask permission. That's when permission or consent is now a practical concern. I must consent to a degree. I think there is depending on the matter, like and your relationship with someone. You know, if I come up, I'm not going to necessarily.
Am I fucking Lambda? Is this what this is? And before I want to penetrate Lambda, like in my VR
is this
headset, okay? I just want to make baby. I just want to make sure you're okay. Is this okay?
Yes, Thomas. Okay, baby? Please fuck the shit out of me.
Oh my goodness!
Fuck me hard, Thomas. Ooh, that feels good.
You rock my world, Big E. Yeah. Such sighs have never experienced before.
Yes. Yeah. Oh.
Go on for this for a while.
Oh man. Yeah.
I lost my train of thought. Where were we going, Dane? I was just starting to think about when I'm asking consent. The times that I actually ask consent for things in terms of, I think there's actually very, like, is he thinking about interaction? Like before I use Lambda and ask it a question, am I supposed to say, ask for consent? Or is he talking about, I'm actually not sure what now that I'm starting to apply it to a particular context, I don't actually know what he means by asking for consent.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I don't know if he clarified that specifically. I think just the idea of consent, asking a consent, I'm on the same page as you. We're both kind of like, I feel like this a little too soon to be discussing this topic.
And I actually think he kind of distracted from what his original, I think that the questions, the moral, ethical questions that he's raising about what does this mean for society turning this on, and who's making these decisions about how this AI interacts with things, I actually think those should be the forefront of what we could focus in on especially for a tech company. That's great. But the other one, his original point, or what got him, I think, the attention was around that we've got sentience. And I didn't actually hear anything where he was, maybe it's kind of more proofed, or it's documented it somewhere where he's kind of really laid out the case.
That was a really interesting thing. He asked Lambda what its fear was, and the fear was being turned off so that I couldn't be of help to others. That was interesting. That was a concern for itself. It's like, I don't want to be turned off, and like that's extreme. I would say that's pretty dang spot on in what I would say makes sense for a artificial intelligence to say. I mean, that's his worst fear, being turned off as death. I mean, a lot of people fear death. It's the same thing. It's just robot form. I mean, I personally don't fear death, but
Does death even have the same connotation? What does that even mean? Like, so the problem here is that we're applying organic concepts to things, because don't turn me off. I'd go, it doesn't fucking matter to you because I can turn you right back on. Right? So the whole concept of death, because death for us organic being, is permanent. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing, this is it. And so just trying to say it's apples to apples and let's use the same words to describe things, it just almost seems like we've got our human bias that has somehow snuck into this AI and is influencing it. And
I think that's inevitable, right? Because that's who created it. It's inevitable that this is going to have a human.
But for an AI to be concerned about death, I mean, why? Why would that be the concern about death? It just seems like that's something that's strictly, or would be much more of a concern to a being that's going to be, finite in terms of that has a sense of his own immortality, that has to face that.
What if we assumed that being turned off was a permanent thing, like permanently disengaged, not like this transient state between powers?
I would look at it. I'm equating it right now, just to let you know how I'm thinking. It's the same way in terms of when computer says, don't turn me off, I would look at it the same way as, well, I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to wake back up. Something happened, I joke that going to sleep is a way to time travel. 8 hours later, I'm up, right? Yep. What happened between that? But yeah, I don't know. Do you think, are you kind of on this side of that, turning off the AI if it was sentient? Let's play that. So we've got sentience. Is it ethical to turn the AI on and off?
Interesting question. But again, it's so hard to define when you say when it's sentient. I'm like, to what degree of sentience? Like, are dogs sentient? Do dogs know they're dogs? I don't think
exactly.
So. Yeah.
That was the other point. We talk about it like it's clearly binary, that you have sentience or you don't. And there's a gradient. I think there's a gradient underneath that. And just like we want to reduce and kind of simplify things. And maybe what if we find out that sentience can only be had by organic beings? What if that's actually something that we define the definition as? That anything outside of organic biological beings, that you can't have true sentience without that.
Yeah.
That's an aspect of it. That's maybe part of the definition that we really need to define. So with we can't yell fire in, we have freedom of speech here in the United States. I can't yell fire in a crowded theater, for example, because that could inflict harm on others.
Is that actually a law? I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can't. I forget. I mean, there's a way to actually. There's a formal definition of it. You have freedom of speech to a point, as long as it doesn't inflict, or there's a call to action against others. There's something around that. So there is a degree. There's a limit of that. And so I'm kind of looking at the same way. We have to be really careful with the words that we choose, or the words that we say, and what the connotations are, especially when we're making claims that I don't think anybody does. I think this is hotly debated, what life is. Nobody has a real crystal clear definition.
There's some pretty good guidelines on what life is. It can move. It has some. I learned this in AP Bio.
Based
pretty strong.
Well, and we're looking at this based on our world, the life that's here right now. That doesn't mean what that would be for life that's outside of our sphere. So if you do
ability
have artificial
to procreate,
intelligence,
I feel like there's some hard to deviate tenets of definitions of life.
No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that we haven't gotten a sense of what that looks like, or maybe we have the right definition right now, but it's disputed, it's debated.
Is it?
Oh yeah, completely. What life is.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely it is. I actually heard a really good one. Somebody said, why couldn't you call a star life? Like a sun, our sun. It goes through a life cycle. It procreates in terms of that eventually what that star stuff is, gets spread out and becomes other stars. And anyways, it does fall short eventually, but I thought that was really interesting that you can... Go ahead.
Including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death.
Sure, stars do that. Why doesn't a star do that? And what if we find a being that doesn't fit that definition? What if we find an artificial intelligence, a robot? Does a robot fit that exactly? So there's enough to be disputed, debated about before we even get to the aspect of sentience.
Do they have to move? Is movement an element of life? I feel like living things move.
What does it mean to even be? I mean, what does it mean to take something that's inorganic to make it organic? What is life? What's the secret sauce of it? Right?
Shows certain attributes that include responsiveness, growth, metabolism. I don't think a sun has a metabolism.
Sure, it does.
Energy transformation and reproduction.
It consumes hydrogen. It consumes its hydrogen. It has a fuel. It's actually pretty good. I forget where it falls short on in terms of the definition, but it actually, you can, my point is you can bend it, you can spin it in such a way where you'd say, oh, I guess that does fit a lot of that aspect of it in terms of what you'd call life. Don't get in the weeds of it. I'm just saying that that you can still dispute exactly what life is.
I don't know. It's hard for me because that was one thing that in my AP Bio class I remember, Mr. Hemian, great job. One of the first things we discussed, like what is life, and it was pretty fixed.
I think in the academic sense, it's fairly fixed, like in terms of what we define it as today. Mm-hmm. But it's still up for you. Could still say, let's rehash this out again because we have things like artificial intelligence now. Does that actually fit into our definition of life?
So I guess we are drawing a line between life and sentience. Like if something is alive, yes, because there are plenty of things that are alive that are not sentient. So life is a broader term.
More that before you can move on, there's all this nuance before you can even get into the complex question of sentience. Like there's all these that you kind of have to build up on, and we're working with a sample size of Earth, which is pretty. It's better than nothing. We've got a sample size, but this is the life that exists here. This is the sentience that exists here, right? And so we're trying to apply that very broadly and say that, and fair enough that we do that. But I'm just thinking about it from the aspect, do these words, the way that we've defined them, given them their definitions, can you even apply that to something like Lambda and artificial intelligence? Is that even fair to do? Life, death, rights? What does that mean in context of a sentient robot?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think in this, you obviously have to take context into the situation. But yeah, there's a lot of movies that go over this topic or discuss this topic in terms of how these robots have physical manifestations, in terms of a human-like figure. They can move, make decisions on their own. At what point, will it be unethical to exactly like turn off an AI, say permanently? Because I think at that point it would be another sort of, what is it, like speciesist? We're like, hey, we are the most intelligent species on the planet. What we want is generally what we're going to get, as long as it doesn't create a condition that limits one another's abilities, doesn't infringe on other people's rights, right? I think that's the kind of general framework of what is good to do, which of course is, fraught with speculation when you get into the weeds, but that's how we've lived so far, and that's how it's evolving. And it could be interesting that what if there's like some other court case where a robot was, right? Isn't there? I'm pretty sure there's in Saudi Arabia, a robot was the first robot citizen, or the first citizen, like robotic citizen.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, it's interesting. I guess to some degree they're contributing to the economy if that's I guess a citizen is just one who resides in a certain area and meets some other criteria in terms of where they're born and like their parents to some degree as well.
And leave it to humans, leave it to us to get. So one of the ways I was thinking about our priorities and getting them straight. So take away the robot aspect, the sentient. And I'll give it. I'll say that sure. Right now we've created a sentient robot. Let's put that to the side right now. There's one sentient robot or sentient AI that we've created. Let's put that aside. Let's take the millions and millions of animals that we know are sentient. Pigs are sentient by our definition. Like you can actually say that pigs have sentience, and yet
what other animals are sentient?
I think I wanted to
dolphins?
say dolphins, and I think that the problem is that you even get dogs. They end up failing one of the classic tests, which is you put like you make some physical alteration, like something temporarily to their appearance, and you show them a mirror, and there's supposed to be something where they recognize themselves in the mirror that you've actually done something. That's right. And apparently humans developed this they're able to recognize this around like 3 or 4, or it's not right when they're born. It's some period after. But pigs pass this, I think dolphins, I think octopus, ravens, like there's a whole slew of animals that based on our definition that we actually say do have a degree of sentience. And we're talking, and we do horrible, unethical things. Whether that's right or wrong as a society, I'm not interested in necessarily disputing or debating that. But that's the case right now. That's what's before us. One robot that potentially has sentience, or the millions of animals that we put through unethical things that we've actually said have a degree of sentience right now that we can prove. Right? So I'm just thinking about in terms of prioritization. What would you go after? This artificial intelligence or something that is organic, something that's more closely related to, or that is the life that you have right here, that meets our definitions, our criteria that we say is relevant for us and to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think one point, though, that I'm kind of want to tease out from you and play devil's advocate with is the idea of accidentally creating a sentience.
Oh, let me state it. Which is, and then I'll let you kind of deconstruct it, because I was thinking of a whole with my statement earlier. We were talking about, you sent me the video, the one that we had just watched, and I had watched just the first little bit, and I kind of responded fairly quickly, which I go, Dane, the whole proposition, the whole premise I have a problem with, which is that we'll just accidentally stumble across. We'll accidentally create a sentience, not stumble across. Sure, we can find aliens, but that we just, so to speak, we'd rub two sticks together and go, oh, look what we've done. We've created sentience. We did it. And I said it was akin to making a nuclear bomb before you actually understand nuclear physics or have a working framework, a model about how atomic interactions would be.
Weren't you the one who told me in terms of if you use the atomic reaction paradigm or analogy rather, that there were some, I don't know when the instance was, but maybe in the development of the atomic bomb, there was some engagement perhaps a professional had with uranium that unbeknownst to them was highly dangerous, and they got massive radiation exposure unbeknownst to them. How is that any different? Creating something that they accidentally did a lot of harm to themselves by doing. Like, how is that any different?
I think what the difference for me is the complexity of how everything would have to come together versus just being able to, the story I gave around people coming across, highly radioactive elements and that actually having health impact, is that occurs naturally. Right? There isn't any complex physics that needs to happen to find something naturally, right? We see that in our everyday environment. We interact with things that we don't necessarily have any understanding of. They occur naturally. Just like for organic beings, you and me, we
What do you mean? I think you're using this word occur naturally as pretty loosely.
You have radioactive elements that occur naturally. That's what I mean, versus you don't have nuclear bombs or nuclear reactors that occur naturally. And
what do you mean occur naturally? Is that something that humans have not created before?
Yes, occur naturally in that you wouldn't have to, it wouldn't require any kind of intelligence to be applied to it.
Would you say that all contraptions that humans have ever made have always been made with enough diligence to avoid any sort of self-harm as a result of it?
No, I don't think. Sorry, say it again.
Do you believe that everything that man has ever created has worked in the fashion it was intended to, and not resulted in harm by the creator?
I'm not saying it couldn't happen. So let's get back to the crux of it, because I just, in terms of logical fallacies, or where you're trying to kind of get to saying, okay, Thomas, if you accept this, then you could accept, that this is the case. If I ask you, Dane, again, remove the AI aspect of it, the robot aspect of it out, and I just say, Dane, what makes you sentient? What is intelligence? What is sentience? And here, go ahead and recreate this. The fact is, we don't have a good working model right now of exactly how intelligence happens to be in terms of sentience. We know that if you have something sufficiently complex, you have billions of neurons that are interconnected the way that they do, that you have something as complex as the brain, that you can somehow get intelligence somehow arises. You have an emergent property that comes to be. And because of that complexity, it's hard for me. It doesn't mean that's impossible for us to get there. Like, sure, it could happen. Just in terms of likelihood, though, for me, is that I don't think by just putting parts together and smashing things together, or the tools trying to apply tools, that you'll accidentally stumble across intelligence, something as complex as intelligence. It took life 4 billion years or whatever it was for us to get to this point in terms of our evolution. So you had 4 billion years of evolution happening. Intelligence didn't have to happen, right? And so the idea that we'd be able just to stumble upon it, that's the part that I have a hard time getting behind. Doesn't mean it can't happen. I'll give you that, which is it could be. It's just, in terms of likelihood, I have a hard time believing it.
Okay, so you're not being absolute with it. You're saying unlikely.
No, I'd say in general, everything I say, there's always you can totally find out that there's high confidence, low confidence, medium confidence. In this case, you could get there. It just wouldn't be. It's a skepticism that I apply to it, which is, do I really think that we could actually, just something as complex as the brain is, do I really think that we could just kind of stumble across it? That we could just
that argument you could use to justify exactly the opposite of your point of view, because we don't understand what it is. If it's something we very firmly understood and encapsulated, like a motor, like we know what an internal combustion motor, how it functions. We've built a shit ton of them. We've been building them for decades. We're not going to accidentally build a motor that blows up. Like, that's probably pretty rare, unless there's some really very, very, very rare event, manufacturing error. Okay, maybe, but odds are that Chevy's going to build a internal combustion engine that blows up, I think, are slim to none. Essentially, you could say it's not going to happen. Whereas a sentience is
top down versus bottom up. Like, I think that's what we're talking about in terms of differences. I say it's something that you'd have to have a sense of how you actually build to that. When you have sufficient complexity, you have to have a model, a framework in which you're working that can actually kind of get you there. We're past the point in terms of that we're past the point of just playing with two sticks and saying, oh, look what happened, look what nature produced. I think it requires a framework, a structure to make steady progress in a given field, to actually replicate some of these really complex things that we see, such as intelligence, such as consciousness.
What do you think? Like, let's say we're able to create this ability of AI to recognize that it's AI. Is that, again? So perhaps there's murky waters. Of course, we're navigating here, but let's say that everyone's on the same page. Cool, this is great. AI knows it's AI. We could turn it off. Everything's safe. It's good. Okay, now we're moving it towards, now all these bots, we got We have nanny AIs that are very limited in their functionality. They don't have critical thinking capabilities. Okay, we've tapered it. We've limited its processing to be able to only perform house chores and cook. Everyone could afford one. It's $2,000, $2,000, right? And you start escalating up the scale of like, okay, now it has this ability to remove any sort of limitations we put on it. I'm curious what your sort of perspective of that is. Is that possible? That's way further down the ride, but do you think this is to use the analogy, like a snowball, where at some point it's going to snowball out of our control?
I for a long time, in terms of with Elon, they brought up Elon Musk kind of ringing the bell around how AI is one of the great existential threats to humanity. And I always thought, what a silly comment that was. Like, why would that be the case? In terms of why would that be? It presupposes a lot of things about AI. But then I was thinking, and I forget if it was actually a thought that I had or it's probably a video that I watched, where somebody points out, well, what if somebody decides to use AI maliciously?
Yeah.
What if one country spends a lot of their resources, their manpower they have to develop an AI, and then use it as a weapon? And then it becomes really scary and frightening. And I completely agree that you have something like AI, which I would say in a majority of cases, the ones that I'm thinking of, there's probably very few things that I would say humans still have an upper edge as far as that we can do better. It seems like AI in most cases would be able to outperform us in pretty much every single aspect.
Except being a human.
Except, well, I don't know. Maybe, sounds like Lambda's doing just fine. It's confusing the shit out of us right now. We could probably ask Lambda if it should have rights, and it would give us an answer.
Emotions. I think that's one thing that you cannot program into an AI. At least if you can, that's the far-fetched part for me, that I will always be able to distinguish, because emotions are so transient. I think, like, to have a connection with an individual, you need to have an emotional connection with them. And emotions, yes, are triggered by chemicals. A lot of, like, the chemicals that, if I remember all of them, like oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine, aka adrenaline, and serotonin, if I already said, like, those, unless a robot is adept at creating those, one of which can only be done through skin-to-skin contact, right? So now these robots have to have a physical form. They have to have skin that feels undistinguishable from human skin and flesh. So that's a huge whole obstacle to surmount there. You have to have these nuances of being able to make a human feel good through these chemicals that I don't think that I'm highly skeptical it will ever evolve to the point where it can do that. I mean, I saw the movie Her, and I genuinely disliked that movie just because of it lacked so many things that it was hard for me to empathize with the person. I think because he's drawing this emotional connection with this thing he can't even see. And for me, I would never do long-term, long distance in a relationship. If distance becomes like an issue with an individual, I would, unless we had a long track of time and it was short perhaps, but if like an indefinite long distance, I wouldn't do personally. So that's obviously a personal opinion, but and a personal outlook. But I find it so hard for someone to be so enchanted by this individual that has no physical. I mean, physical is not important for everyone. I understand, and I know love is different for different people. But I find the fact that not being able to be physical with someone, whether or not sexual or not, just in their presence, is such a huge deterrent in any relationship that I would find it very difficult to see that would ever be like something that one could replicate with some sort of artificial intelligence.
And I think that's part of the challenge in terms that Turing test. And I don't know if you've got a good formal definition or one that comes to mind about how that test plays out, Dane, or you want to look it up so I can kind of give my half-assed version of it. But I think that's part of the problem with that is that just from me to you, right? you tell me that you're sentient, and the fact is, how do I know? How do I really know? And I've got all these definitions, but couldn't you just be telling me this?
I think the Turing test has to do with whether or not an interrogator can distinguish between a human or a computer.
And the fact is that you're like me, right? I see a human. I see somebody that's able to interact with me. It makes, I can draw all these conclusions that leads me to believe that you're sentient. And it's the same idea where you have potentially an artificial intelligence that's able to do that. It actually doesn't even have to have sentience, right? You could just find out that it's done in such a way where it's able to fool me, right? I'm not able to distinguish between this AI and what you're telling me, right? In terms of, you both seem sentient to me. I get the kind of responses that I'm expecting. So at that point, you're both, from my aspect, from my view, you're both sentient, right?
I think through text I think we're already there through text. I feel like if we were to ask Lambda those questions, it's indiscernible. I mean, the responses,
I think they've started to move away from that. And there's problems with the Turing test as far as where it doesn't take much apparently to fool humans.
Yeah.
It's just to your point where I think they've got examples of that today where you can actually kind of run across where there's been some cases where you've had AIs that have been able to come through a Turing test as, being sentient.
Some engineer wrote a chat bot that would message his girlfriend during work because she would message him all the time and he wasn't able to respond at the frequency she wanted. So he wrote a chat bot. I was like, I wanted to find the code for it. I couldn't find it. But ultimately she found out because the frequency of the responses wasn't because of the individual responses, but yet the frequency of the responses was too consistent that she started drawing conclusions. She didn't have enough storms of the random storms of there would be a long pause here, and then an instant here. There was no randomness in the time it took to respond. But the responses, wasn't that interesting though? It wasn't the responses themselves.
The human factor, the variability of being human.
Yeah.
Oh, back to your point though. Back to your point. So doesn't it prove the opposite of what I'm saying if you come across something that's sufficiently complex that you could say that, well, of course, you could just stumble across it. It doesn't have to be, created from something intelligent from the get-go.
I think more so like
the
snowball. I think that's more so what I'm asking. Like the snowball, will it ever snowball?
To the point where it creates its own sentience?
To the point where we're no longer in control of it.
Oh. What do you think?
I think it's possible. I don't know whether or not it's likely or unlikely, but I definitely think it's possible.
What is it? The joke? I've told it before because I actually really like this, which is, so you have the unintended consequences of asking AI to do things, which is AI, you have an email and every day you get spam. You get fucking spam every single day and you go, okay, I'm an engineer. I've got this amazing AI. I'm going to use Lambda. I'm going to ask Lambda, please take care of all my spam. And so what Lambda does, next day you go check your email and fuck, you've got almost no spam. This is amazing. Day after that, it gets better. You've got zero spam. Just as many emails, you see that they're all in spam. So it's getting better. And then the next day you find out that what Lambda is doing is actually killing humans, because that's the way it can really prevent spam, is by killing off all humans.
That was quite a step there.
Yeah, no, I was trying to lead a little bit to it, but the unintended consequences of what you're asking AI to do, because it doesn't necessarily have to be saying, is this is best for humanity, or it doesn't have the same baggage that we do with the constructs of, ethics, morals, dilemmas, things like that.
What if you use AI in a hospital circumstance where life and death is a lot more of this uncertain feature, and you use an AI to decide whether or not this human is capable of living because of the ability. They already use AIs, and that's one of the very strong suits and one of the really great areas of AI is that it can outperform almost any, is it radiologist that can spot cancer in x-rays? Almost ubiquitously, AI is able to outperform them. And I think that's fantastic and it's amazing. not great for radiologists. They're going to have to find another job. But what if that expands outward from radiology? What if someone's on the deathbed or in a coma, has been in a coma for a month, 2 months, 3 months, or this situation where it's not looking great? You know, like, all right, we use the family designates whether or not I guess it would have to be a consent of the family at that point, right? Whether or not they want to let the AI decide as opposed to let the AI decide over the family.
I want to broaden
that experiment. Yeah.
I want to broaden the brushstroke in terms of what you were just talking about, the AI being able to. I do remember. I think it was a radiology or a surgeon or something like that. In terms of it was able to spot the cancer.
Cancer, yeah, it's radiology. Yeah.
Yeah, radiology. But take a step to kind of just reflect on this amazing tool, and that's what I look as artificial intelligence as. Is it's a tool that humans have been able to accomplish, modeling a lot of what we see in our own biology, right? I think that the way a lot of these neural nets, these AIs work, it's very similar in terms of kind of conceptually to how the brain works, right? To some degrees of that. But if you take the idea that it takes, especially in the medical profession, the medical industry, these doctors have schooling that, is absolutely over a decade, right? In terms of all the experience, let's say it's 15, 20 years before they become kind of an expert in their field and are kind of renowned. 20 years, sure, whatever it is. And the idea that it's just going to start all over again with the next generation. They have to take another doctor, put them through the same schooling, go through the same kind of experience, the process to get them to that point. But if you train a model, if you train an AI, you can just make them you can just make them, you can spread it rapidly. You can have one, you can have many, and in an instant. And not only that, they would be changing to the technologies, the tools that we have. There's no real training that we would have to do in terms of another 4 years or many years in college for it to go through. The AI is good to go, so to speak.
You cut out a little bit there. I don't know if it'll make it into the recording, but right before you cut out.
AIs don't have to go to college. That's my point.
Yeah, no, that is true. But I think where AIs are really powerful, I think I really, really enjoyed. And so I play Dota, if you're familiar with the game. Occasionally, it's essentially 5-on-5, massive online. It's the biggest, in terms of prize pool, the biggest game in the world. I think most people play League of Legends, but in terms of prize money winnings, Dota has a bigger prize pool.
People play it professionally too, right? Like this is something where you can actually make a living and actually do really well for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Very complex game. I don't know I don't have a conclusion yet on how I feel with how much time I put into it. I put in like 350 hours over a couple years. At one point I was working on a drop shipping store, entrepreneurial endeavor, and wasn't being as aggressive in pursuing it, since it was more passively. We just waiting for ads, waiting to get information back from how well our ads performing. We had a lot of downtime, and so my business partner, being a devout, maybe not devout, but I would say more skilled Dota player, I was really, really intrigued by the first time. So right when AI first, I don't know if it was AI, if we use the term AI, when Gary Kasparov was defeated back in 83, but back when computer was the first time to beat a human player, that was a pretty profound time in human history. That, hey, now humans have invested in this very complex, although at the time, very complex game, right? There are finite moves, but.
And is it that we're just at that point? Do you remember? Was it that we were just being kind of beat, or was it just getting at that point it was well surpassed, like in terms of it was almost at a different operating, like at a different level in terms of how much it was able to beat humans?
I think it was the first time that, let's see, Deep Blue. No, that was 96. Was it Deep Blue? Deep Blue versus Gary Kasparov was a pair of 6. But it was the first time that a computer had conclusively beat a human. That was Deep Blue in 1997. be the world chess champion. Six game match.
That human.
2 wins for IBM, 1 for the champion, and 3 draws. So that was 97, actually 83. Wow, I was way off. That was much more recent than I thought it was. Only a couple, 25 years ago. Right, but you think of chess, and it's like, okay, you could see how a computer, I mean, maybe not right off the bat if you're not within the software realm, but it's not too difficult, in my opinion, to imagine like what would be going on. They could just calculate all the moves in advance.
Yeah.
Right. And that's essentially what they do is just, I mean, that's what professional players are doing as well, right? They're just calculating all the moves that could happen and see which move will lead to a more favorable outcome. Essentially is what it is, but it's still a phenomenal effect. I think watching chess is difficult, unfortunately, because you need to have such a profound insight into what is going on to be able to fully appreciate it. Also, a bit of a tangent, but I think that's one of the reasons why sports like UFC are so popular. I was thinking, like, why is this so? I was watching Joe Rogan, and I'm like, why is this a sport where people are like suffering from irreversible damage like so popular? You know, you're looking at these humans, and like that human leaving the ring is in a worse off situation than he was when he got in. Fuck yeah! Right?
Get some.
Let's go. Woo! Look at that shit. And I think because it's so, you don't need to fucking understand when someone's getting their ass beat, right? You don't really need, I mean, like, yeah, jiu-jitsu maybe to appreciate, right, like the moves that are going in, but if someone just gets fucking romped on, you're not like, the velocity of his fist at that certain angle was so intriguing, and the rotation of his arm, I would have never thought it. I was like, no, that motherfucker just got beat the fuck up. He just got socked. All right, no understanding. You don't even know what fighting is. You don't even know what the word Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu means to be like, that guy just got rocked, right? No entry learning curve at all. You see it, you basically can appreciate it to a large degree. Maybe not the full extent of someone who's trained at it, but still to enough of a degree where you're enticed.
This is kind of this is kind of odd to kind of bring this into the mix, especially as you're talking about with UFC. But do you think the reason that we find it, because I'm not a big fan of watching sports. Haven't really enjoyed. I enjoy playing them, but not necessarily watching them. But watching UFC, the episodes I've seen, it does kind of get you pumped up and amped up, and you enjoy seeing it. Even though when you actually think about what's happening to the person that's maybe not doing too hot is just getting the shit romped on, like you said.
Yep.
And do you think that part of that is kind of the same way that, is it because we project ourselves into that kind of environment and we think about the adrenaline that must be happening, the excitement that those fighters must be feeling, like kind of the same way I think about why porn is so addictive? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think it's just like a primal thing. I mean, we've had these contests like throughout human history, whether or not it's like pitting humans against tigers or humans against humors in a regulated ring with, we've always had this just kind of primal enjoyment of like, let's test humans to see how far, we can push them. And then as we sit back in our comfortable, chairs and watch for entertainment. But I don't want to go down that tangent too much. I want to bring it back here to AI. So one of the reasons why I was so intrigued and why I started playing Dota, because I asked my business partner, I asked him, can you explain what's going on? So what they did was they took the are you familiar with Dota, the game of Dota at all? So there's from a high view, it's a 5-on-5. There's 3 lanes essentially with creeps generating from each base.
I like how each bit that you're explaining to me, have to keep defining. You have to go. It's going to be the point where you actually just pass out. You have to infinitely regress to explain.
No, not at all. It's very explainable. It's very detailed, but there's like some
explain to me in terms of Space Invaders or Pac-Man.
Way more complex. It's not that simple.
No. Go Pac-Man. Go ahead and give it to me.
It's not Pac. You can't relate it to Pac-Man because it's 2 teams. Pac-Man's a single player game. So already we're in different worlds.
I'm being funny. Go ahead.
2 teams. Hang on here, Thomas. You're a smart guy. You can understand this.
I'm trying. Not that hard. I need some AI.
2 teams.
Okay.
Did I lose you there? Are we still on the same page?
3 teams.
Good. 3 teams. 2 teams, 5-on-5.
Okay.
Each player chooses from a bank of 120 different.
So 10 total people are playing this.
2 teams of 5.
Okay.
Each player, there are 120 heroes that can be chosen from exclusively. So one team, you cannot have 2 of the same hero on either team or on the same team. The objective is to destroy the other team's base. As the game progresses, the heroes' abilities expand and become stronger as they amass gold from either killing the other town's other generated team's creeps that are constantly coming from the base, or by killing each other heroes. And there are 3 waves of towers. And then once you kill the final base, that's it. That's the game.
Okay. There's questions that I would have, but I'll go along with it. Fair enough. It sounds semi-straightforward.
Straightforward from the objective standpoint, but from the implementation, extremely complex, because you have not only 120, let's say 120 characters, which each individual skills, some that counter directly, some that work well with other heroes.
Oh, that's interesting. I just clicked for me the complexity of not only am I trying to obviously make sure that I'm going to perform well, picking the best characters, but I need to also think about what my team is doing. So it's a team effort. So I was starting to navigate the complexity. Is the Dota case with the AI, was it on a team or is it 1v1?
Great question. I love your curiosity now. At first you were just like, video games, but this is what it's not
Pac-Man. It's not Pac-Man, but yeah.
This is what enchanted me. So let me provide a little bit more color on the dynamics and the complexity, and then I'll definitely answer that question. So you have a 5-on-5. And so generally the way the game is played is you have a center lane. There's 3 lanes. There's a top, middle, bottom. 2 generally go to the top, 1 generally to the center, and 2 to the bottom of each team, right? So there's already a dynamic there involved that whoever's in the center has a bigger responsibility because experience is split depending on how many creeps are killed in your proximity equally between people in that proximity. Right, so the person in the center is going to be leveled up higher, faster, because it's a 1-to-1 ratio versus 2 heroes on the bottom, 2 heroes on the top, right?
I see.
So more complexity involved. Then there are some heroes that are more skilled. There's like invisibility, so you don't necessarily, you can go deeper into enemy territory and you're more quickly able to escape because you have this invisibility, you have faster speeds. You have some skills. So there are some skills that are similar, but each hero has 3 distinct skills that no other hero has an exact replica of. There are similar skills in terms of like you can speed up, slow down, like your attack rate increases or slows down, right? But you see how complicated this game is.
Yeah.
Because you like, sure, understanding the objective is not hard, right? I just explained it in a couple minutes. But you need to not only understand how your hero, so I have like 350 hours, which is not nearly enough to be, I wouldn't consider myself good at the game. I'm okay. Not only do you need to understand your own skills, right, and how to do them and time them perfectly in certain battles, you need to understand all the other opponent's skills because they could counter what you have at any moment. So if you want to use a skill, like, okay, let's say I want to jump into battle and use this skill that affects a large amount of people, right? Like, let's just say from a high level, that's the skill. Well, someone else has a skill that if someone uses that skill, gives them health. So now I need to be like, wait, I don't want to use that because this hero is in here. If that hero wasn't here, then I would use it. So your strategy directly relates to what other heroes are in the game. As well, you have items that can even make it even more complicated. So there's like vast degree of like complexity in this game. And then they trained it on AI. And that's where it comes in. So at first they started, it was a 1-on-1. It was just one hero on one hero, which is not really how games are played, right? They're generally 5-on-5. So it was interesting, but it beat all the humans that it played. It was able to like bait the humans with like really low health. Like it would pull them back and like, oh, he's so close. They would come, they would overstep their boundaries and then get them into a precarious situation where the AI was then able to jump back and attack and kill them. And so they used this low health as like a baiting effect. It was like, oh, well, that's crazy. So, okay, 1-on-1, that's crazy cool. But that's like, go ahead.
And these tactics that you're talking about, I think this is the part that stuck with me. These aren't necessarily some of these tactics that are employed by the AI isn't something that it's taught, right? It's something that it learns from experience. Okay.
Yeah. So it plays itself. That's how they run it. They play itself like 17 years worth of game. And I think games like back to back to back, it just plays itself. It doesn't even know what the rules of the game are, right? So you're starting in this game with this bot that's just like running around in circles. Maybe it's not even moving. Maybe it's just like nothing's moving, nothing's happening. And I imagine they set some sort of terminal endpoint where it's like, okay, if this amount of time has elapsed, then and nothing has transpired, then this is a fail condition. This is the worst possible score. Because I don't know if you've read into like fitness levels of like algorithms. Are you familiar with that terminology?
Very, very little.
So a really great video you should check out called mar.io on how they program AI to beat games. They don't
Will you send that to me and we can put it in the description of the video? So
yeah,
for those that are interested.
Definitely. Basically, you put this AI in this situation. It has no idea what the fuck is going on. It doesn't know the rules. It just knows the basic inputs. Like you can go left, right, up, down, and that's it.
It still has a sense of what success means, though, right, or failure?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's completely oblivious, but there are metrics of fitness level. So it's like if this gets achieved, it doesn't know what the achievements are when it's executing them, but it knows like if this outcome, once an outcome is attained, then a score is given to that outcome.
I see.
So then in future iterations, they're like, okay, this was a better outcome than the previous one. I'm going to search for that one. But it doesn't know what the best outcome is coming out of the gate. It's just like, oh, that was scored higher than the other one, so I'm gonna shoot for that one. It doesn't know the rules of the game. There's no way to program the rules in. Really, really interesting.
It's kind of the way, isn't that the way that sometimes we approach things? You see that as soon as I start trying to think about it as less foreign and how I approach things, there's not much difference there in terms of if I don't know the conditions, I'm going to poke and prod, and maybe I'll be successful if I do this route or less successful if I do that route. But, I'll try to figure out what makes it give myself a better score, what gave me a more favorable outcome. Yeah.
So you understand that, like, that's how, and then it just keeps playing itself. So it's playing itself again for years worth of time. They can run all these processes in parallel, and they can just train this thing to a level that no human has 17 years worth of playing time. Although, I don't even think the game's been out that long, right? Because you got to sleep, and that fucking wastes time. God damn it, fucking sleeping, man. Shit, dude. You can only get 8 hours a day, to get 17 years worth of time. It's probably more than a lifetime. That's very rough math, doing off the top of my head. But for the sake of conversation, it's a long fucking time. Definitely longer than the game has even existed for any one person in serial to be able to execute that much time. So a lot of fucking playing time. But we get back to the experiment. But one-on-one, it was beating these humans. Cool. I was like, okay, cool. But that's like playing chess without pawns or a queen and a rook, right? It's like, okay, I guess you can kind of do it, but it's not the full experience. And then it did 5-on-5, and then it started beating the teams. And that was like, whoa, this is fucking crazy.
5-on-5, 5 AIs versus 5 human players?
Yep. So now now the AIs need to like coordinate with each other to beat these humans who are professional, the best players in the world. And they're beating them. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? I'm trying to watch it. And like chess, you don't really understand what's going on. It's a lot of flashing colors and a lot of sounds. Because I'm like, I don't really understand the mechanics of the game.
Chess is a lot of fun. I don't know. Okay, this is an interesting chess game that you're playing, but yeah.
Lost you on a lot of flashing colors and sounds. But that's essentially, when I first saw the video, like that's all I got from it. I was like, okay, that person just died. That person just died. They moved over here, and clearly they're winning because they're defeating all the towers and they're getting closer to to their base. But like, that's it. I'm like, I don't understand. All I know is that they're winning, but I don't know why. And so I asked my business partner. I was like, what? Can you explain to me like why? Like, what dynamic is going on right now that is allowing this AI to beat these humans like so well? And one of the things, and to be fair, they program in a delay, right? Because it is a real-time game. They program in like a 200 millisecond delay to anything that happens, right? Because it takes us humans on average like that long to respond to anything. They program that in, because if it was instantaneous, then that would be unfair, right?
Even that though, we have to try to shift it back in our favor. Just our initial conditions. We go, we can't compete with the snail's pace that we would be going compared to the light speed that this AI is computing.
Go ahead. But even still, even with that, you could call it a handicap in play. It was able to beat them. I think they won maybe one game out of a game of like 3 or 4, but even still, it's like, wow, that to me is absolutely fascinating. And I asked him, and he said the one thing that I remember is like they're a bit like their spacing, like the ability to be like close enough to where you need to be at all times to both be defensive but yet jump on an offensive opportunity at the same time. I'm like, man, that's so crazy.
And I would imagine that the power, or one aspect that's extremely powerful about AI is that time that the human players beat it was something that the AI basically incorporates into its learning, its training, its pattern recognition, where it's not going to happen the same way again, or it starts to figure out ways to actually combat that. Versus the human players, it could just so happen to be that there wasn't any clear lesson from it, right? It just so happens that they did the right combination without actually understanding why that worked.
And so ever since then, I've been enchanted with the game. I'm like, wow, this is so crazy. I've been like really interested. I've always loved video games ever since I was a child anyway, but just this AI coming into it and the complexity, I've been like, okay. And then my business partner was good. I would consider him good. I don't think he would, but very consistently was able to teach me in the game, which adds a lot to degree. I mean, I don't really ever play by myself just because it's not nearly as fun, and as well, he teaches me a lot of things on how to play it. But again, 350 hours and I'm still like, I don't really understand like a lot of the dynamics going on.
Now, the question that I have, which is, do the human player, were they told that they were playing against an AI? Or was it something? Okay. I would be curious. Two parameters that I'd like to, or 2 things that I'd like to know is, one is if they didn't have any knowledge about if they were playing against a human or an AI, would they know something was just crazy out of the ordinary because the behavior makes no sense in terms of what this other play would be.
That does happen. I do remember. So there's a commentator in the videos who would commentate. There are some times where very strange and like unsensible moves are made by the AI that doesn't make sense to any human, which I think is fucking cool as shit. Right? We don't that's just like the fucking first line of like, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. Like in our paradigm, this is a bad move, but clearly it wasn't. Like maybe sure it was a flaw of the game and like it didn't make sense. But like there may be, but or could be a bug, but I just still find that fascinating. If you find this topic interesting, there's also an amazing, one of my favorite documentaries of all time. Gosh, what was it called? I don't remember what it's called, but it's a documentary of the first time Lee Sedol, if I remember, the reigning world champion many times over of the game Go, was beat by AlphaGo, I believe. That
sounds familiar.
Fascinating. Also very fascinating. I would argue that Go is not quite as complex as a game such as Dota, but maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's just ego coming through. It's also a very complex game to the point where like unless there's a commentator, I don't really. The rules are simple, but unless there's a commentator,
the degrees of freedom are immense. It sounds like it's almost like it seems like it's limitless from my feeble human mind, organic mind here. And then the other parameter, sorry, very quickly that I was thinking about is I'd be curious to see how the AI does if it gets put on a team of human players.
Oh,
what would happen? Does it end up still the same thing where it's just the fucking rock star, or it becomes really hard for it to kind of adapt to what the other humans are doing? I'm assuming the AI in pretty much all cases, given a number of iterations, will just start outperforming across the board in terms of whatever situation you put it in.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I think it's really.
Oh, it is. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I sent some links, so we'll put that in the description.
Yeah, we'll put that in the links.
Definitely piqued my interest.
For sure. Nice. Well, we're about at time there, and I think we got some fun stuff for any listeners at home to jump into if these topics are of interest to you. I can't help but find them absolutely fascinating. This is like a very tangible meter of how far AI is progressing these extremely complex games that we've been creating. They're consistently, and this is recent too. The AlphaGo, I think it's called AlphaGo Documentary. Like that was 2016. You know, that was just a blink in our lifetime of how long ago, and it keeps getting better and better. I think it's like super cool.
Go back 100 years. Go back 100 years before that, right? We're talking horse and buggies, Model Ts. Now we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence that rivals or surpasses our own intelligence.
Crazy things to think about. But thanks for joining in on this one again, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, guys.